My boss showed up at my door just after midnight, and the look on her face told me my quiet life was about to be turned upside down. My name is Jake. I am 27 years old, and I live alone in a small rental apartment on the edge of Austin, Texas. It is not much. Scuffed hardwood floors that creak when I walk too fast. A narrow balcony where I hung warm Edison lights just to make the evenings feel less empty. And a kitchen barely big enough for one person to cook without bumping into the counter. I moved here after college and took a job at a mid-sized marketing firm downtown as a content strategist. I write campaign copy, build creative decks, sit through meetings that stretch way longer than they should, and then come home and do it all over again the next day. It is a simple life. Maybe too simple. But after my parents died in a highway accident 3 years ago, simple was the only thing I knew how to hold on to. No siblings. No family nearby. Just work, running trails on weekends, cheap pasta on weeknights, and the kind of quiet that slowly stops feeling peaceful and starts feeling permanent. That Thursday night was no different from any other. I had reheated leftover pasta, eaten it standing at the counter because I did not feel like setting the table for one, and was rinsing the bowl when the knocking started. It was not the kind of knock a neighbor makes when they need to borrow something. It was sharp. Urgent. 3 hard raps, a pause, then 3 more like whoever was on the other side was fighting the urge to just start pounding. My chest tightened before my brain even caught up. Nobody comes to my door past midnight. Nobody even knows where I live well enough to show up uninvited. I dried my hands on a dish towel and walked to the door slowly, trying to talk myself out of the feeling crawling up my spine. I looked through the peephole, but the angle was off and all I saw was shadow and the soft amber blur of my Edison lights. I unlocked the door anyway. The warm night air pushed in first, still carrying that heavy electric smell from the storm that had rolled through earlier. And then I saw her, Diane, my boss, director of the entire creative division at the firm. 40 years old, sharp as a blade, the kind of woman who could walk into a room mid-argument and have everyone straighten up without saying a single word. I had worked under her for 2 years. In that time, I had seen her handle impossible clients without blinking, redirect a derailed campaign meeting in under 3 minutes, and deliver hard feedback in a way that somehow made you want to work harder instead of giving up. She was always composed, always in control, always the most put-together person in any room she entered. She was not composed right now. Her auburn hair fell loosely around her shoulders instead of being pinned back the way she wore it at work. She had on a deep green dress like she had come from somewhere that required dressing up, with a thin cardigan hanging off one shoulder like she had forgotten it was there. Her eyes were red around the edges, not from crying exactly, but from the kind of exhaustion that comes after you have been holding something heavy for too long and your body is starting to give out. One hand was gripping her keys so tightly that her knuckles had gone pale. For a long second, neither of us said anything. I had spent 2 years keeping what I felt about her neatly buried. It was not something I was proud of. She was older. She was my direct supervisor. Wanting her felt like standing at the edge of something I had no business being near. So I had done what I always did. I kept my head down, did my work, smiled in the right places, and never let it show. Not once. Not even close. But right now, standing in my doorway at midnight, she did not look like my boss. She looked like someone who had nowhere left to go. Diane, I finally said, and her name sounded strange coming out of my mouth in that context, like a word from one world accidentally dropped into another. What are you doing here? She did not answer. She stepped forward, brushed past me, and walked straight into my kitchen like her feet already knew the layout. The door clicked shut behind her. She pulled out a chair at my small table and sat down hard, her shoulders dropping all at once like a building finally settling after years of holding its own weight. She set her keys on the table with a loud clatter, then stared at the floor like it owed her something. I stood in the kitchen doorway and did not move. My mind was running too fast for me to catch a single thought cleanly. Was she in trouble? Was someone after her? Had something happened at work? I tried to picture her like this at the office and I could not do it. Diane did not show cracks. Diane did not let people see her bend. And she absolutely did not show up unannounced at the apartment of a 27-year-old junior employee on a Thursday night. I moved to the counter and filled the kettle because I needed something to do with my hands. I grabbed 2 mugs from the cabinet. I kept my back to her for a moment and focused on breathing like a normal person. Then she spoke. "I am done pretending, Jake," she said. Her voice was low and rough, like it had been scraped raw somewhere between wherever she had come from and my front door. "You are the one I want." I did not move. I did not breathe right. The words landed somewhere deep and knocked something loose that I had spent 2 years keeping locked. I set the mugs down carefully so I would not drop them. She swallowed and kept going, like now that she had started she was afraid of what stopping would feel like. "I do not want to hide it anymore," she said. "I want to stay here tonight." My chest felt like something was pressing against the inside of it. 1,000 warnings were firing at once in my head. She was my boss. People would notice. This could unravel everything I had worked to build. But underneath all of that, something else was happening. Something I had no clean word for. A part of me that had been dark for a long time was quietly, dangerously starting to wake up. I pulled out the chair across from her, sat down, and slid one of the mugs toward her hands. "Tell me what happened," I said. And she did. She wrapped both hands around the mug and stared into the steam like she was searching for the right place to begin. Her brother had set it up. That was the first thing she said, and the way she said it told me everything about how she felt going in. His name was Todd, 2 years younger than her, the kind of man who believed that caring about someone meant fixing them. Ever since her divorce had been finalized, he had been pushing. Dinner suggestions. Introductions at his company events. Friendly nudges that did not feel friendly after the 15th time. He thought he was helping. Diane had gone because saying no had started requiring more energy than just showing up. The restaurant was in downtown Austin, the kind of place with white tablecloths and a sommelier who recites the wine list like a performance. Her date was a finance executive named Brad, successful by every visible measure, confident in a way that had probably worked on people before. He was well-dressed. He arrived on time. For the first 3 minutes, it seemed like it might be tolerable. Then he started talking. He covered his portfolio first. Then his lake house up near Marble Falls. Then a weekend trip he had just taken to a private golf retreat in Scottsdale. He talked with the focused energy of someone who had rehearsed, someone who believed that listing accomplishments was the same thing as being interesting. Diane sat across from him and smiled and nodded and quietly counted the minutes. Then the food arrived and something shifted. He leaned back in his chair, looked at her with the relaxed expression of a man about to say something generous, and told her that women in leadership positions like hers often forgot to think about the bigger picture. That ambition was admirable, but there was a ceiling to what it could give you. That someone her age, he said her age like it was a gentle warning, should be thinking about balance. About what she actually wanted her life to look like in 10 years. He glanced at her left hand where her rings used to sit and said, with a small smile, that it was never too late to course correct. Diane told me all of this quietly, without raising her voice, which somehow made it worse. She did not sound angry. She sounded tired. The kind of tired that lives below the surface and does not go away with sleep. She had sat there through the rest of the entree, she said, smiling, redirecting the conversation, performing the version of herself that kept things smooth. She was good at that. She had been good at that for years. But somewhere between clearing the plates and the dessert menu arriving, something inside her simply stopped cooperating. Not loudly, not with a scene. She just felt it go quiet in a way that scared her. She folded her napkin. She told him she was not feeling well. She stood up, said goodnight, and walked out through the front door of the restaurant into the warm Austin night before he had fully registered what was happening. Outside, she had stood on the sidewalk for a moment not knowing which direction to move. She opened a rideshare app and got into the first car that pulled up. The driver asked where she wanted to go. She said drive east and keep going. They moved through the city for close to 40 minutes. Past the river. Past the downtown cluster of glass buildings. Past the office where she and I both spent most of our waking hours. Past the coffee shop near the parking garage where she had once seen me sitting alone on a Saturday morning with my laptop and a black coffee, working on something that was not even due until the following week. She remembered that, she said. She had noticed it and not said anything. She had noticed a lot of things she had not said anything about. When the car turned onto my street, her hands were shaking. I sat across from her at that small kitchen table and listened to all of it without interrupting. The steam from the mugs drifted between us. Outside, a car moved slowly down the road and its headlights swept briefly across the kitchen wall and disappeared. The apartment felt smaller than usual. Not in a bad way. In the way a space feels when something important is happening inside it. Then she reached up and slipped a ring off her right hand. Then another one from the same hand. She set them both beside her keys without looking at them, like she was putting down things she had carried too long and did not want to pick back up. She looked at me and her eyes held something I had never seen in them before. Not weakness, not confusion. Something more honest than either of those. Something that had been carefully kept behind glass for a long time and had finally found a crack. "I do not want to go back to my apartment and sit in the dark," she said. "I do not want to keep performing for people who never asked what it costs me." She paused. And then she said, "You have always looked at me like you actually see what is underneath all of it." My throat pulled tight. I wanted to deny it. I wanted to keep us both safe by pretending she was wrong. But she was not wrong and we both knew it. I said. My voice came out lower than I intended. I just never thought I had any right to say so. She leaned forward slightly across the table. The kitchen light caught the side of her face, and for a moment I forgot about job titles and org charts and everything else that was supposed to matter. "I know this could blow up," she said. "The age gap. The office. What people will say." She held my gaze and did not look away. "Tell me to go if that is what you want. Say it right now and I will walk out and we will never talk about this again." The clock on the wall kept ticking. The fridge hummed. Outside, the city was almost completely still. I looked at her across that small table. This woman who had walked through my door at midnight carrying more than anyone should have to carry alone. And I said the only true thing I had left. "Do not go," I said. And the look that crossed her face when I said it was something I knew I would never forget for the rest of my life, that I almost let her leave. And if I had, I think I would have spent the rest of my life wondering what was on the other side of that decision. After I told her not to go, neither of us moved for a long moment. The kitchen felt like it was holding its breath along with us. Then she stood up slowly from her chair, walked around the small table, and stopped right in front of me. I stood too because sitting suddenly felt impossible. We were close enough that I could smell her perfume. Something soft and clean, mixed with the faint warmth still lingering in the night air that had followed her inside. Her eyes searched mine like she was looking for any sign that I would pull back. I did not pull back. I kissed her. It was not rushed. It was not dramatic. It was slow and quiet and honest, the kind of kiss that carries the weight of everything that was never said. When we pulled apart, she kept her eyes closed for a second longer, like she wanted to stay inside that moment before the world came rushing back in. I told her she could have the bedroom. I would take the couch. She started to argue and I stopped her gently. I told her the truth. That I wanted her too much to think clearly right now and that doing this right mattered more to me than doing it fast. She looked at me for a long moment and then nodded, something in her expression softening in a way I had never seen at the office. I found a spare toothbrush still in its packaging from an old travel kit. I set a clean towel on the bathroom counter. Small things, but she took them like they meant something real, and watching her do that made my chest feel full in a way I was not prepared for. Around 2 in the morning, the bedroom door opened. Soft footsteps moved down the hall. She appeared at the edge of the living room wrapped in the blanket I had left at the foot of the bed. Her hair loose around her shoulders, her expression stripped of everything she wore at work. She said she had tried to sleep and could not. That being alone in the quiet was too loud tonight. I moved over on the couch without a word. She sat beside me and then leaned in slowly, resting her head against my shoulder. I put my arm around her and we stayed like that, not talking, just listening to the apartment breathe around us. Old floorboards settling. A distant siren fading several blocks away. Her breath gradually slowing into something calmer. I was just starting to think the night might actually end peacefully when my phone lit up on the coffee table. The screen glowed bright in the dark room. I reached for it without thinking and read the message before I could stop myself. It was from Greg, one of the senior operations managers at the firm. Sent at 2:24 in the morning. The message said, "Need to talk Monday first thing. It is about you and Diane." I felt the air leave my lungs slowly. Diane lifted her head from my shoulder and looked at my face before she looked at the phone. She could tell something was wrong just from my expression. I turned the screen toward her without saying anything and watched her read it. She went very still. Not the stillness of panic. The stillness of someone shifting into a different gear, moving from feeling into thinking. She handed the phone back to me and sat up straight. "We do not fall apart over this," she said. Her voice was steady but quiet. "We think. We plan. We go in Monday with our heads clear and our story clean." I nodded even though my stomach felt like the floor had dropped out from under it. The warmth that had filled the apartment an hour earlier felt very far away now. She laid out the plan simply and without hesitation. She would go home Sunday. She would spend the day thinking through every professional angle. Monday, she would already have a formal recommendation in motion to transfer me to the senior content team under Greg. It would be backed by documented performance. Legitimate on every level. She said she could not remain my direct supervisor if we were going to be honest about what was happening between us. Not for my protection alone. For hers too. I told her I did not want the transfer to look like a favor. She cut me off gently but firmly. She said my work record spoke for itself and that she was prepared to defend that in any room, in front of anyone. She was not offering me a gift. She was removing a conflict before it could be used against either of us. I looked at her sitting there on my couch in the middle of the night, barefoot, hair loose, wearing a blanket over a green dress, laying out a professional strategy like she was in a boardroom, and I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. I felt like I was not alone in the world. We sat together until almost 4 in the morning. Not always talking. Sometimes just quiet. She told me small things I had never known. That she had started running again after the divorce because it was the only hour of the day when her brain stopped narrating everything. That she kept a notebook of things she wanted to eventually write but never showed anyone. That the jazz record she played on Friday evenings in her office was something her father used to put on during Sunday dinners when she was a child. I told her things too. About the first year after my parents died, when I would come home from work and stand in the kitchen for 10 minutes before I could make myself cook anything. About how I hung the Edison lights on the balcony not for decoration but because coming home to total darkness had started to feel unbearable. About how I had trained myself to stop expecting good things to last because losing them hurt more than never having them at all. She listened to all of it without flinching and without trying to fix any of it. She just listened. And that, more than anything else that had happened since midnight, was what got to me most. Around 4:30 she finally fell asleep against my shoulder. I sat very still so I would not wake her and stared at the balcony door where the Edison lights were still glowing softly outside. Tiny warm points against the dark Austin sky. I did not sleep. I just sat there holding on to the quiet, already knowing that when daylight came, everything waiting for us on the other side of it was going to require more courage than either of us had needed in a very long time that I have never been good at pretending. That turned out to matter more than I expected. Daylight came gray and slow through the balcony door. I heard the bedroom door open just after 7. Diane having moved there sometime before dawn after I had gently guided her off my shoulder and covered her with the blanket. When I walked into the kitchen, she was already up, dressed in her clothes from the night before, her cardigan back on her shoulders, her hair pushed back with her hand. She had found the coffee and was standing at the counter watching it brew like it was the most important thing happening in the world. She looked up when I walked in. "Morning," she said quietly. Just that one word. But the way she said it, steady and direct, like she had already decided something while I was still half asleep on the couch, told me she had not spent the early hours doubting herself. She had spent them preparing. We drank coffee at my small kitchen table as the city outside slowly woke up. A garbage truck moved down the street below. A dog barked twice and went quiet. She told me she was going home to shower and think, and that she would have the transfer recommendation drafted by end of day Sunday. She told me to go into Monday like nothing was on fire. "Answer Greg's questions honestly," she said, "but do not volunteer more than what is asked. Let the paperwork speak first." Before she left, She stood at my front door with her keys in her hand and looked at me for a long moment. She said, "I meant what I said last night. Every word of it." Then she walked out into the early morning and I stood at the door and watched her go and felt the strange, slightly terrifying sensation of caring too much about whether someone made it home safely. Monday hit like a wall. Greg's office was on the 4th floor, corner room, with a view of the parking structure that nobody ever complimented. He was already sitting when I arrived. Door closed behind us before I had fully taken my seat. He folded his hands on the desk and looked at me the way people look at something they are still deciding how to handle. He told me there were rumblings moving through the building. Nothing formal. No names attached yet. But the kind of low conversation that traveled fast in a place where everyone worked closely and noticed everything. He said he did not like surprises and he did not like cleaning up situations that could have been handled earlier. I told him I respected Diane and I respected the work and I was not going to pretend otherwise. He held my gaze for a moment like he was measuring the weight of what I had just said. Then he told me the transfer request was already sitting in the HR system. Filed Sunday evening. Backed by 2 years of documented performance reviews, client feedback scores, and campaign results. He said the senior content team had a gap that my skill set fit cleanly. He said if anyone asked, that was the full story because it was also the true story. He told me to keep things professional inside the building. No public displays. No office talk. If a complaint came through, it would be investigated like any other. Then he said, "Go earn the role," and that was the end of the meeting. I walked out into the hallway and stood by the water fountain for a moment just breathing. We were still standing. That was what I kept thinking. After everything, we were still standing. The transfer went through by Wednesday. A brief team announcement, polite and dry, citing my contributions to recent campaigns. Most people accepted it at face value. Some did not. I could tell by the way certain conversations paused when I entered a room, or the way a coworker named Derek smiled at me during a team lunch with just a little too much understanding in his expression. He said something about it being useful to have strong relationships with leadership. I laughed like it did not land anywhere. It landed everywhere. I responded by working harder than I ever had. Not to silence Derek. Not to prove anything to people who had already made up their minds. I worked hard because it was the only thing I actually controlled. I took the most demanding briefs on the new team. I stayed late not because anyone asked but because the work was genuinely interesting and throwing myself into it was the one place where the noise from everything else went quiet. 2 weeks after the transfer, an anonymous complaint landed in HR. Favoritism. Conflict of interest. The words were careful and indirect, the kind of language someone uses when they want to cause damage without leaving fingerprints. Diane came to my apartment that evening still in her blazer. She knocked instead of calling first, which told me how rattled she was underneath the composed surface. When I opened the door, she walked in and I closed it behind her and she leaned against me and I felt her exhale like she had been carrying a stone in her chest all day. She said the HR team was doing a standard review, that her documentation was clean, that the recommendation had been made through proper channels and every decision in it was defensible. She said all the right things. But her hands were not steady and she was not looking directly at me while she said them. I held her face gently and waited until her eyes met mine. I told her she had not done anything wrong, that the people trying to make noise were doing it because they had nothing real to stand on, that the work was going to speak louder than all of it if we just stayed steady and stayed together. She did not say anything back. She just leaned her forehead against mine and closed her eyes and stayed there for a long moment in the quiet of my apartment. The HR review concluded 3 weeks later with no findings. Diane's documentation held up exactly as she said it would. The anonymous complaint went nowhere because there was nowhere real for it to go. After that, something shifted. Not all at once. Gradually, the way weather changes without you noticing until the season is already different. I landed a regional campaign for a home goods brand that the client called the strongest creative work they had seen from our firm in years. My name appeared in an industry newsletter attached to the results. People on my new team started coming to me with questions instead of working around me. The sideways looks faded. Derek stopped smiling like he knew something. Diane held her ground at the office with the same quiet force she always had, and what had once been whispered skepticism slowly became ordinary respect again. On a Friday evening 6 months after that midnight knock, I stopped at a flower stand near my apartment and bought a small bunch of wildflowers because she had once mentioned offhand that she liked things that looked like they had grown somewhere real instead of being arranged by a machine. When she arrived and I handed them to her at the door, she stopped and looked at them for a moment and then looked at me like she was genuinely surprised I had been paying that kind of attention. I had always been paying attention. I just finally had permission to show it. We drove out to the hill country that weekend. A small rental cabin with a wooden porch and a view of cedar and limestone rolling out in every direction. No email, no office small talk, no carefully managed expressions in hallways. Just two people who had found each other in a complicated way, sitting on a porch as the sun dropped low and turned the sky the color of something worth keeping. She rested her head on my shoulder and said she had one regret about all of it. I asked what it was. She said she wished she had knocked on my door sooner. I pulled her closer and felt, for the first time in 3 years, that the silence around me was not empty. It was full of her breathing and the wind moving through the cedar trees and the kind of peace that only comes when you finally stop waiting for good things to fall apart. That midnight knock had cost us both something. Sleep, certainty, the comfort of keeping everything simple and predictable. But it had also given us something neither of us had expected to find again. A place where we did not have to perform. A person who stayed even after seeing the parts we usually kept hidden. Some doors are terrifying to open, but some doors, when you are finally brave enough to walk through them, lead you exactly where you were always supposed to be.